On a cold February day in 1988, Julie Ward set off on a huge adventure. She quit her job and signed up for a 5-month journey, driving overland from Britain to Kenya. From her home in Suffolk, she travelled to a town on the Kentish coast and piled into a big yellow converted truck with a group of other eager travellers.
She was 27, 28 years old, and she needed to go and do some exploring from her own point of view.
It was just all very exciting. You know, we're all very young. Most of us were in our early 20s.
She loved the wildlife, she loved animals, this was just the perfect trip for her.
But what had been a dream trip driving through Africa soured into tragedy when Julie was violently murdered. The exact circumstances of Julie's death are still not known, 37 years on. Despite her father John visiting Kenya more than 200 times. Like him, I want to know who killed Julie, why someone wanted the crime erased, and how far the cover-up went.
I'd like to try and solve it in spite of them.
They've delivered a letter. It says, "To the Telegraph team."
It wouldn't have been a murder.
I get the fear. If I'd have believed what these people done.
I've decided not to do any interviews on this subject as I have done my obligation to the family. So a girl goes missing and no one talks about it.
What's that? That's how you think.
His name is Jonathan Moy.
That puts him right at the top of the suspects list as a minimum. It just tends to get you more and more angry, actually, and more determined, because you think these bastards shouldn't get away with it.
This is Lucy Brewer. Back in 1988, she joined Julie on that big yellow truck. They crossed the English Channel and set off, travelling through France and Spain, over the Mediterranean and into Morocco.
We had these windows that, when the weather got hotter, we rolled up the sides, and then there were these benches that you could just sit out on. So we'd sit out with our legs hanging out the side.
After 5 months, Julie and her new friends arrived in Kenya. She sent long letters and postcards to her family back home, including to her brother Bob. Having a great time except for the 5:30 in the morning starts, seen lots of lions, elephants, etc, etc.
Mine seemed to concentrate on the quality of beer.
A few weeks before she was due to visit her family in England, Julie decided she wanted to squeeze in a trip to the Masai Mara Game Reserve.
Probably the jewel in the crown so far as Kenyan Wildlife Service is concerned.
This is Julie's father, John, a self-made man who'd earned a fortune from hotels. Julie arrived in the Masai Mara 8 days before her flight back to England. The next day, her Jeep broke down and she was towed to a safari lodge where she waited for a replacement part to be flown in. At around midday, on the 6th of September, she set off from the safari lodge towards Sand River Gate, near the Tanzanian border. We don't know if she ever got there. We don't know if she got lost or stuck or had more mechanical trouble, because somewhere on that journey, Julie Ward disappeared. This is Doug Morrow, Julie's landlord in Nairobi. Her plane tickets to England were still lying exactly where she'd left them on the table. The date on them had passed.
I went to bed, concerned, and then about 10 o'clock at night I got a call from John.
John got on the first flight to Nairobi and started organising a search of the Masai Mara. On the second day of the search, a message came crackling over the radio. A pilot had spotted something. Julie's Jeep was in a small gully a few miles east of the Sand River Gate, and it looked stuck.
We'd break into the vehicle, hoping, because there's a big jumble of tents and bedding in the back, and we thought she might be underneath it because she'd been missing there for 6 days. I pulled everything out, but she wasn't there. I called her name, she must be around here somewhere. No.
After more desperate searching, another message came over the radio. One of the teams had found something.
The body's been found, but it's all chaos, He found Julie's leg, which had been severed just below the knee, half of her jaw, lower jaw, in and around the fire. And for Dad, that was his daughter. That's hard.
In normal procedure, evidence is bagged for forensic testing, But as they were making to leave, Julie's remains were still on the ground. So John collected up what was left of Julie himself. He raked through her ashes with his hands.
I just went to shake his hand, and he showed me his hand, and he had her ashes all over his hands, which is a pretty moving kind of experience.
Bob was back in Bury St Edmunds with his mum, Jan, and his older brother, Tim.
The one minute you expect to come back after 6 months, the next minute your dad's ringing up saying that they found some chopped up charred remains of her in the middle of nowhere. It's just, you are just numb.
John told the family what he had heard from an official at the scene, that they thought it was suicide. Julie's mother, Jan, was having none of it. But the alternative was also unthinkable. John feared Julie had been murdered. Within a week, he was back on a plane to Kenya. He went to see the pathologist who had conducted Julie's post-mortem.
We know that she died by foul play, simply because the leg had been cut off. And the jawbone. But one of the features of Shaker's pathology, which was very simple stuff, is that the leg had been severed off just below here, just through here. So you've got a flat end, at the end of the leg with the foot here, and this was all charred and burnt on the flat end. So Shaker says, well, the sheer sequence of events it must have been cut first and then burnt.
It was only after that the chief pathologist of Kenya changed that, implying an animal had done it. So within the first few days, and we were talking 5 days, Dad knew something was wrong.
In Kenya, Julie's death was treated as an accident for nearly a year. It was only after a lot of lobbying from John that Kenya finally agreed to hold an inquest to formally establish the cause of Julie's death. It found that Julie had been murdered. The verdict made headlines around the world, and Kenya's president, Daniel Arap Moi, was under pressure to do something. At long last, the Kenyan police opened a murder investigation, and President Moi asked Britain to send in London's Metropolitan Police to assist them.
The thought that Scotland Yard, the Met, will get involved, it was like, it's over. It's over. Brilliant.
Like John and the Met did all those years ago, I needed to head to Kenya. There were 3 key locations in the Masai Mara I wanted to focus on. Firstly, Sand River Gate. This was where the last confirmed sighting of Julie took place. Secondly, the Makari Outpost, a small ranger station near the Tanzanian border. And thirdly, the place, the spot where Julie's remains were found. One of the first people John set his sights on was the last known person to see Julie alive, David Kandula Nchoko. He sometimes goes by David and sometimes by Kandula, so I'm just going to call him by his last name. He was a revenue clerk at Sand River Gate, and it was his job to keep track of the tourists arriving each day. Shortly after Julie's murder, he told the Kenyan police that he had seen Julie leave on her own just after 2:30 p.m. on the day she disappeared. And he showed them her name written in the visitor's book.
The handwriting expert, bless him, said categorically, no, it's not hers. Good, well, we knew that really. But he says, I have some news for you. It's this guy. It's the handwriting of the clerk.
Superintendent Graham Searle was part of SO1, an elite team from the Met that got the call to run the Julie Ward murder investigation. Nchoko said he'd just been trying to get the records right. Graham believed him. In 1999, however, Nchoko was charged with Julie's murder. He was acquitted without standing trial. I wanted to talk to Nchoko too, but it wasn't easy. Kenyan journalist Edwin Okoth and I spent a long time looking for Nchoko.
Names can sort of tell you where they come from, okay? It's better in the village because you can keep asking. So we rely on what I always told you about, human Google Maps, where you just ask people about how to go to reach to a certain place. And we had to rely on school names and very old family names to track people.
At one point, I think we found him, but it's another David Nchoko. He's the half-brother of the man we're after. Eventually, we tracked the right one down, and he agreed to talk. We drove out to Nchoko's farm, which sits in a lush green valley. He spent 4 months on remand in one of the country's most notorious prisons, where, his half-brother tells me, he was tortured. Nchoka told me the ordeal had a huge impact, including on his family.
The first one died
When you were away?
because of stress. Left behind the daughter, which is alive now.
Then he told us how he got tangled in Julie's case in the first place. I understand you wrote the name Julie Ward in the book. Can you tell us why?
That era became a great problem to me.
Why didn't you tell them voluntarily that you had written it?
No, they didn't ask of that.
In the time after she disappeared, when people were talking about what had happened, what were the rumours that were circulating?
I didn't hear because the place was somewhere isolated. There were no people there.
Did people start talking about what had happened or might have happened? There were no rumours. So a girl goes missing and no one talks about
There
it.
were no rumors I had. No.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. At the end of a couple of hours, I feel frustrated. I came away with the impression that Nchoka's still afraid of talking all these years later. There are two schools of thought about how Julie's Jeep ended up where it did. The first one is that Julie's murderer had something to do with it, either forcing her there or having the Jeep planted there as a decoy. The second theory goes that soon after she set off from Sand River Gate in the direction of Nairobi, she took a sharp right, veering off the main road across scrubland down a track, and that she then got stuck before being found by her killer. This is what the Met's Graham Searle thinks happened, and that after getting stuck, she was found and attacked by someone. But this track has caused a lot of debate. The Ward family don't believe it existed, nor that Julie would ever have driven down it. If she had driven to the gully of her own accord, then who could have found her? For the Met team, back in the early 90s, the clues led to one location, the Makari outpost, the small station used by rangers who monitored poachers coming over the border from Tanzania.
These kind of 5 huts in the middle of nowhere, no running water, no electricity. They really are huts. It seemed logical that they would be involved because there's hardly anybody in this Masai Mara area.
Graham Searle wondered whether Julie had stumbled across the ranger station while she was looking for help, or if the rangers had found her Jeep and taken her back there. So they interviewed them, and the Met officers say that 2 of the rangers struggled to get their stories straight. Their names were Peter Kippen and Jonah Magaroy. In 1992, they went on trial, nearly 4 years after Julie's death.
Mrs. Ward sat just 2 rows in front of the men accused of killing Julie.
Peter Kippen and Jonah Magaroy were acquitted. Due to a lack of evidence, the Ward family questioned why the case had ever got to court. And for John, it added to a concern that the team from the Met hadn't been as thorough as he had initially hoped.
Their investigation was flawed in so many ways and simply aimed at the wrong 2 people.
I wanted to find Kippen and Magaroy. It wasn't to be. Sources who didn't want to go on camera told me that Kippen died a long time ago. I haven't been able to verify that, but I have established that Magaroy died in 2020. People close to him say he became an alcoholic and never recovered from what happened.
We end up at the place where Julie's found. When I got there myself, I had this most amazing horror feeling when I got there.
Earlier, we heard a lot about the state of Julie's remains and what clues it gave us about what happened to her. But could we also get an insight from the lead up to them being found? Edwin Okoth helped me track down one of the senior wardens from the Masai Mara, James Sindio. He was number 2 to the head warden, Simon McCullough. They were both involved in the search for Julie.
From where the car was found up to where the remains were found, so it's another distance of about 8 kilometers of very bushy vegetation.
The wards were suspicious of the speed with which Simon found Julie's remains.
He must have gone in an absolute straight line because we've done it so many times and measured the time, you see.
Simon claimed vultures had led him to Julie's remains. And James tells me he thinks this could be true.
The many years I've walked the Mara, you look at the vultures. Normally from there, where you see them landing, then you know there is a carcass there.
Bob Ward told me that his father had a feeling with you that you wanted to tell him something.
There is one missing link in the whole investigation, the inquest.
He was close friends with one of the men who'd been in Simon's Jeep when they discovered Julie's remains. I'm going to call this friend Matthew. It's not his real name, but I don't want to give that here because I haven't been able to verify this story.
After they visited the scene of crime, he appeared very disturbed. Very, very disturbed. I learned from him that there was a gentleman from the nearby Manyatas, Masai elder. He came and found them there at the scene.
The search party was allegedly near Julie's dismembered body when the Masai elder approached. This elder allegedly told the search party that he heard something.
He said that he heard at night some scream, loud scream.
The Masai elder allegedly said he waited until the following day to approach the area to see what was going on.
Early in the morning, that's when they went and found the body, complete body intact, of a white girl.
I'm keenly aware that this is just hearsay, but if true, it suggests the acts of killing Julie and dismembering her body were two separate events, and it throws up all sorts of questions, like, did the police ever talk to people in the Masai villages?
Here, somebody saying he heard the scream and even had seen the body, but that claim was not part of the investigation.
This tip feels like a breakthrough. It's also given me some leads to follow, starting with Simon McCullough. Simon stood trial for Julie's murder in March 1999, but was acquitted, just like the two rangers, Peter Kippen and Jonah Magaroy, and the revenue clerk, David Nchoko, before him. Simon walked free. We're here in Kilgoris in Kenya's Transmara West. We've come looking for Simon Ole Makala. I wanted to ask him about this thing that James Sindio mentioned, about the Masai elder. I wanted to know if it's true, and if so, what the elder told him, and to find out whether he passed on that information. After a long search, we approached Simon's farm through a rusty gate, but Simon doesn't want to talk to us about the Julie Ward case. His initial response was that it was very traumatic, and that he doesn't want to go back there. And then it was quite strange as we left. So he basically said that he needed to go to a meeting, but he came in the car with us to his destination a little bit down the road. At that point, I did what I usually do, which is as we drive away from something, I kind of describe the surroundings, describe how it went. So I told him that I was recording myself. For the tape, I'll explain that the extra voice you can hear in the car is Simon Ole Makala, who has given us a lovely welcome, but he hasn't wanted to discuss the thing we came to talk about. And the reason is he says that he's very traumatized by the whole thing. Isn't that right? And then I asked him again this question, one of the key questions I wanted to ask him, which was this new piece of information we've heard about a Masai elder appearing at the scene of Julie's remains when Simon Makala and the police officers first found them. And this Masai elder supposedly told them that he had encountered Julie's body intact in the same spot the day before, and that the night prior to that he'd heard a lot of horrendous screaming. And it was really striking how much he just kind of stopped talking. And then, because I knew that was the only opportunity I would have, I also put to him that actually Jonathan Moy had been involved. That's not a name we've spoken about yet, Jonathan Moy. But some think he's the key to this whole mystery. He was the son of Daniel Arap Moy, Kenya's president at the time of Julie's death. One day, only a couple of weeks after Julie's death, John was standing outside a hotel in the Masai Mara. He was waiting for his driver to arrive when a woman approached him.
She gets Dad's hand and puts a bit of paper in it. He gets back to the hotel, opens up the bit of paper, and it says, "The man you are looking for is Jonathan Torovich Moi."
President Moi was an immensely powerful figure who ended up controlling Kenya for 24 years and was ruthless about squashing dissent. Jonathan was his rally-driving son. Initially, John thought little of it, but his name came up again, nearly 5 years later.
And Jonathan?
No, Jonathan was just having a track, this one rough.
Like you go running in?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah.
This is Valentine Uhuru Kadipo. He told John he was hiding from the Kenyan authorities because he was a former member of a notorious paramilitary unit who'd seen all sorts of atrocities, including Julie Ward's murder. Kadipo said he was ordered to go to the Makari outpost and then on to a clearing in the bush. Jonathan Moi was allegedly there too, drinking and laughing with some other men. While Kadipo was looking at her, one of the men warned him away in Swahili. Later that night, Kadipo says he was ordered to a different clearing where he saw Julie again. This time, Jonathan Moi was allegedly with two other powerful men, Nicholas Biwott, who was a cabinet minister, and Noah Arup too, who was head of the Criminal Investigations Department, one of Kenya's most senior policemen. Kadipo says that this time, Julie was stripped to the waist and being pushed around. Kadipo claimed that after the group had been abusing Julie for some time,
Nicholas Biwott, who ordered the lady to be killed, I don't know what for.
Nicholas Biwott and Noah Arup too were two of the most important men in the country at the time, and they were allegedly joined by the son of the most important man, President Daniel Arap Moi. It's a huge claim and it feels quite outlandish. Initially, John was quite persuaded by Kadipo's testimony.
The more we checked, everything came out exactly as the man said. He was able to give me places, descriptions of motor vehicles, descriptions of people.
There was a particular piece of evidence that John kept coming back to. Kadipo told John that when Julie was being mistreated violently, she was hit repeatedly with an ox whip, which has on the end of it a tiny barb. It matched something that had been found by Professor Gresham, the British pathologist, a series of marks on Julie's leg. The allegations were put to Jonathan Moi in 1997, and he gave a statement to the Kenyan police.
Throughout the month of September 1988, I was at my farm at Eldama Ravine. I would also state that I have never been at the Masai Mara Game Reserve. I have nothing to do with this Kadipo's allegations or anything to do with the disappearance of the late Julie Ward.
John lost faith in Kadipo at that point, but the rumours surrounding Jonathan Moi persisted. A few years after Kadipo's death in 2009, two new sources provided evidence that did persuade John. One of them said Jonathan Moi had made a booking at a camp in the Masai Mara in early September 1988. Remember, Jonathan Moi told the police that he'd spent the whole of that month at his farm. If he can confirm that Jonathan Moi was in the camp at the key time, then suddenly, that blasts a hole in Jonathan Moi's testimony. We eventually find the camp Jonathan Moi is said to have stayed at and get an address for the first source. He very bravely agrees to talk to us the following day. Honestly, we're so delighted with how it went. None of us had very high expectations, but instead of immediately chasing us away as we feared, this person invited us in. They even congratulated us on doing what we're doing. That night, Edwin and I celebrated a job well done. But the following morning, when we go back, it turns out that the celebrations are premature. Ugh, this feels terrible. The house is locked up. The source has left us a letter. A security guard approaches and hands it to me through our car window. It says, "To the Telegraph team, I've decided not to do any interviews on this subject. Please don't call or visit me or my properties going forward." It feels so different from his attitude yesterday, where he congratulated us for looking into this. Things are not quite as dramatic with the second camp source, the one who says they met Jonathan Moi. But the end result is similar. They say they want to think about the request overnight, and the following morning a text comes through, and they're not going to speak either.
There was a fear. I get the fear. But there also comes a point where you have a moral judgment to make, and I don't think they've ever made that moral judgment correctly.
I've tried to piece together the evidence that points towards Jonathan Moy. There's the testimony from Valentine Kadipo, the note from the clothes seller, the camp source's statement saying he was in the Masai Mara when Julie was missing, and the story about the Masai elder who allegedly saw Julie's body, still intact. These pieces don't quite fit together. Kadipo described Julie being dismembered immediately after she was killed. If that's true, then the Masai elder story can't be, because that suggests she was killed first, then cut up sometime later. We can suspect Jonathan Moy was involved, but we can't prove it. And even if we could, we'd then have to sit with the unsettling thought that he never paid the price for his crimes. Julie's family believe he did it, and that this, Jonathan Moy's status, the very fact of who his father was, is why they found it so hard to get answers. And for Bob, this is the biggest failing of the whole case.
It would make sense to us that the narrative of Jonathan Moy being involved in Julie's murder is correct, because it gives reason to everything. And unfortunately, he got away with murder.
So what did happen to Julie? The Wards believed that the Kenyan authorities had covered up Julie's murder, and that the mistakes by the Met, as they saw them, were linked.
So our overarching view is that when Scotland Yard got involved, they went to support the Kenyan narrative rather than base their reports on factual evidence, forensic evidence, that my dad got.
The Wards made a complaint to the Met back in 2000, and to their surprise, they responded by ordering an independent investigation into the way the case had been handled. It was undertaken by a team from the Lincolnshire Police, and it's known as the Lynx inquiry. It was utterly scathing about the quality of the Met's early work, but the inquiry's conclusion about the Met was clear. There was insufficient evidence to support John's allegation of a cover-up. And Graham Searle has said they did do a good job, the very best they could in the circumstances.
There's a litany of errors. There's flawed investigation. There's no murder weapon search. The wrong people were interviewed. It's just untenable to think that they could have ended up on the conclusions they ended up with, given the information they had.
The Met sent a letter to the Ward family last year in response to a second complaint they filed accusing the Met of a cover-up. One sentence in particular stands out. The 2018 inquiry had one remaining person of interest, Mr. Jonathan Moy. There was something else too. I can reveal President Moy's government made a secret payment to the Ward family of up to £700,000. It was styled as reimbursement for some of the money John had spent on the search for his daughter's killers. John wrote a manuscript before his death which hasn't been published, and according to that, a senior member of the Kenyan government told him the payment was being made without the Kenyan government making any admission of guilt, and that it had to remain off the record. However, it's likely to be seen as an attempt by the Moy government to persuade John to give up his search, just as attention was shifting to Jonathan Moy. For my part, I think that aged 28 and having travelled through Africa, Julie had become braver and more confident than she'd been in Britain. I think she might have run into someone in the Masai Mara as she was leaving Sand River, and what could have started out as a friendly situation, possibly even a consensual liaison with someone she knew, turned into rape. I don't know for sure that Jonathan Moy was involved, but I do know that this young, independent, kind-natured woman was horrifically mistreated. She was likely whipped, leaving those kite-shaped marks, and then murdered to silence her. Whoever was responsible probably thought they'd get away with it. But what they didn't bank on was Julie having a father as determined, relentless, and well-resourced as John. Julie's murderer was never brought to justice, but when John died, he at least knew that he had done everything in his power to deny the culprit peace. John and Jan died within 2 weeks of each other in 2023, and the Ward brothers hosted a joint funeral for them. It turned into a celebration for Julie as well. Amongst the guests was Lucy Brewer.
Lovely. At John and Jan's funeral, Bob called us soulmates, which was a lovely, lovely thing to say. Yeah.
And do you feel that?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, very lucky to have known her.
For more on Julie's murder and how it crossed the paths of MI6 agents, listen to our 5-part podcast, Murder in the Masai Mara.